Hello you guys. So I'm finally doing my next review video. I was waiting for, I waited for at least one movie to come in the mail. I have another 30s, I have the original Looney Tunes show coming in, but I didn't want to wait like another week and a half for how long it's going to take. But I'm going to do this in two different categories. I'm going to do my 30s horror movies, and then the rest I just kind of put in a 30s movie. So that way it's split up evenly and at least a little bit more organized. But I'm going to start off by showing you my 30s horror films. So I've been collecting these for probably like 2 years now. The first one I got is a Universal horror pack, and this has like all the original monster movies from the 30s and 40s. This is definitely worth getting if you are into like the Universal monster movies. You get pretty much all the classics. It's got Frankenstein, Dracula, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, the Bride of Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and a few others. But this one's pretty cool. It's like a region-free version, which I always get nervous about buying any sort of region different than one, because I live in the US and I can't get a lot of region 2 stuff to play. But this is region free. But yeah, it comes with like a little booklet inside that shows you like movie posters and looks like set notes and such. Again, definitely worth getting if you're into like the classic monster movies. And then I have this one, and I got this at like a dollar store, and I thought this would be interesting to get because I don't really have any other Christopher Lee or Peter Cushing movies. Now they're basically like classic British horror actors. They were in a lot of B horror films. Christopher Lee played Dracula in a lot of different British horror films, and that's what some of these are. You have two different Dracula films with Christopher Lee in it, and then The Mummy from the 50s, which has Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. That's basically why I got this, because I don't have a lot of Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee films. And it was interesting to see their takes, the Hammer film takes on, The Mummy and Dracula. I don't know if I watched the Frankenstein one, and if I did, I don't remember liking it, but this is pretty cool, again, if you're into like the Hammer film version or the British versions of the Universal's films. Now, these are all of the Dracula ones I have. I've been into Dracula for a minute. The one I watched originally was the Bram Stoker one from '92 with Gary Oldman. That was pretty much the first one I watched. Actually, I take that back. I think the first one I watched was a parody, which I have that too. But again, I have the original from 1931 with Bela Lugosi in that pack. Excuse me, I got some acid reflux going on. But I have this version from the 70s. This has Donald Pleasence. You would know him as Dr. Loomis as in the original Halloween films. But this is from the 70s, and I really like this version. It's shot very dark toned, and it's very just dark. It's a darker version of it. And they switched like Mina and Lucy around in this, but it's pretty much the same story. The guy who plays Dracula in this, I think Frank Langella, I really like him as Dracula. He makes the character very soothing and hypnotic and really draws you into the movie. And then of course I do have the Bram Stoker version from '92. I need to eventually upgrade and get the Blu-ray of this for the special edition, because there is a new version out that's got like a shit ton of special features, and this is one of my favorite films in general. I just really like that it's so experimental and takes all of these different turns. You really get to see Dracula in so many different lights in this film. And a lot of people complain about Keanu Reeves being in it because he was kind of weirdly cast at the time in this film, but to tell you the truth, I really think he did a lot better of acting in his older films. He comes off very monotone in his newer stuff, and not that he's a bad actor, I think it's just the way he comes off now. But anyways, this is one of my favorite movies of all time. There's a better edition out there, I need to get it, but it's just, especially if you're into Winona Ryder films, because she's one of the main characters of this as well, and I always think that she picked great films to do. Maybe not so much in her later career, but definitely in the '90s for sure. Now this was the one I was talking about that I saw originally before the Bram Stoker one, which is Dracula Dead and Loving It. This is, first of all, this is a Blockbuster, like, $4 DVD. They used to give out these, like, ones that you could just get in these clear cases if they had, like, too much inventory. But this is from 95, and it's a parody of the Bram Stoker one and the other Dracula films. But I think it's really funny. I love Leslie Nielsen films and humor, so it's definitely, like, up your alley if you're interested in that. And there's this great scene where he's having, like, a dream sequence, and he's talking about chicken, and he keeps calling it chip, and I just think that's hysterical. This version I saw when I was younger, too, and I don't think it's, like... Oh shit, this DVD almost flew out. I don't think it's, like, the best adaptation of Dracula, but I do love the cast of it, just because, you know, like, Jennifer Esposito's in it, and I really liked her in The Master of Disguise. And Omar Epps, he's been in a few movies I like too, but it's Dracula 2000. This was a Dimension Films version of Dracula, and they, again, in the late 90s and early 2000s, they were really trying to make their own adaptations to horror films and really push it with marketing horror films, and they got a hold of this one and made it. And there are 2 sequels to this, however, I do not give 2 fucks about watching them. This is one of the newest versions of Dracula, which is technically a prequel. It really goes into the whole storyline of him as Vlad the Impaler and when he went to war. And I really liked this because you got to see a more human side of Dracula before he condemned himself. And, you know, if you're really into the idea of a backstory for the villain, it's really cool to watch. And there's a lot of cool stuff. I can't remember the actor's name. He's a lot older. But there's a character in this that is technically a creature. And I don't want to get into it too much, but he's an older actor, and he does a really good job in it. So, then of course, you know, you can't not have Dracula and then you can't have Dracula and then not have some Frankenstein shit. So, this is my Frankenstein collection. This is like a legacy collection, which has like all of the Universal original Frankensteins in it, like Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein, Ghost of Frankenstein. I haven't watched all these because I don't know if I'd want to sit down and actually watch all those different versions. There's so many already, I just don't know if I want to watch a bunch of them off that. But this is the Young Frankenstein, the Mel Brooks version from the 70s with Gene Wilder. This is a classic. I hadn't actually seen this most of my life, and then a few years ago when I started collecting movies again, I was like, I really need to get this. This is like, I've been to people's houses and seen this in their movie collection. I'm like, I need to get this, and I did like it. It's got a lot of adult humor in it for what it's about, but then again, I think that was kind of what Mel Brooks was going for. This is the version from the 90s with Helena Bonham Carter and Robert De Niro is the monster, and this is a really cool one. Sony Pictures put this out 2 years after they put out the Dracula version with Keanu Reeves and Anthony Hopkins and Gary Oldman. So this is really good, very dramatic and gruesome. They really went for the gruesomeness in this. And this is probably my favorite remake of Frankenstein. I would really say check this out if you want to see a good adaptation of the black and white version. Now, this is one of the newer ones, and I hadn't even really known about this, and I found out about it looking up other Frankenstein movies, and this is Victor Frankenstein with James McAvoy and Daniel Radcliffe. Now, this is basically a retelling of how Victor Frankenstein came upon Igor, which Igor is supposed to be like his henchman or his helper, but he's not in every adaptation. I don't think he was in the Robert De Niro one, but I could be wrong. I haven't seen that one in forever. But it's basically a different adaptation of how they came to meet, and he finds Daniel Radcliffe, who Daniel Radcliffe plays Igor, the hunchback motherfucker, but he finds him, Victor Frankenstein finds him at a circus, and then he takes him in because he knows like a lot about the medical field, and they end up, you know, experimenting and, you know, furthering the advancements of, you know, bringing something back to life. I really liked this. It took a lot of different turns in it and actually had a lot of emotional moments in it. So I would say check it out if you want to see a newer adaptation. It did kind of remind me of like a mini series from Netflix or something. It was it kind of goes a lot of different directions. Now this one isn't actually like an adaptation of Frankenstein. It's actually more of like a prequel to Frankenstein. Again, I like a lot of these prequel ideas, but this is Mary Shelley with Elle Fanning, which came out a few years ago, but it's basically her story of how she came to become a writer, well, a well-known writer who really fought to get her story out there and make something out of her life. This is a really tragic movie. There's a lot of negative things that happen in this, but it is really well done. I thought Elle Fanning was just great in this. It's more on the emotional side and more on the dramatic side than it is horror, but I consider it, you know, a stem of Frankenstein because it is about Mary Shelley. So again, check it out if you want to know more about the Frankenstein series. This one is directed by Todd Browning, and this was the movie he made directly after Dracula. So Todd Browning was the one who directed the original Dracula that Bela Lugosi was in, and he made a movie right after that for Universal named Freaks. Now this movie, well, it says Warner Brothers, but I thought he made it for Universal. But it's basically a movie about a traveling freak show or circus that there's freaks in the show, but they one of them ends up falling for this older woman who's kind of like she's like swindling people for money and stuff, and her and this other guy who are part of the circus are kind of planning something against him. They want his money because he's kind of a bachelor even though he's part of the freak show. But it's a really weird movie, and it doesn't start off like a horror movie. It starts off again more of like a drama or like a thriller, and then it ends up kind of becoming like a horror film by the end of it. The freaks turn on this woman for betraying their kind, and she really makes them, she ends up becoming a dick at the end of the movie, and they kind of get her back. So really creepy stuff. And they used, you know, they used real deformed people, which is kind of a shame, but at the same time it adds to the effectiveness for the time period, I think. This movie is a Boris Karloff film that he made, I think, a year after Frankenstein. Now, he's the one who played the monster in Frankenstein, and this movie is called The Old Dark House. And this is like it's pretty much a haunted house film, but it again takes a lot of weird turns. Like, these people end up stranded in a storm and have to stay in this like old castle with this brother and sister, and they have like a servant. Well, no, maybe he was the brother too. It's this family, and they're very dysfunctional and like don't really get along, and you find out there's all these secrets they're keeping. It's really cool. I don't really know much to say about it. Melvin Douglas is in this, and this was obviously when he was a lot younger, but he was in more horror films later on in his career. I would just say check this out if you're into 30s films or Boris Karloff. Boris Karloff doesn't really talk in this, but he didn't really talk in Frankenstein, so. Now, again, this one is part of, I have the Mummy in that Universal pack, and Boris Karloff did play the Mummy in that one too, but I also have the newer ones with Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz. Now, I didn't like the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor very much. I got like 10 minutes into it and shut it off. I didn't like that Rachel Weisz wasn't in that one, and I really felt it drug down Brendan Fraser's character. He came off very depressed, and I wasn't digging the vibe too much. But I really do like these movies. They're very adventurous and fun, at least up until you get to the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. I just was not digging that at all. I even really like the Scorpion King, even though it's about The Rock's character. So these are really good, and I wanted to get the whole set because I really do like the first two a lot, and I really ended up liking the Scorpion King. I hadn't really watched that one until I bought this set. This is the newest edition of The Mummy. Now, this has Tom Cruise in it, and people shit on him a lot. He picks good movies, even though his way of life and way of thinking people don't necessarily agree with. This also has Russell Crowe in it and a lot of other interesting actors, but this is basically another remake of The Mummy, another retelling. Universal had this company come out called Dark Universe, and they were supposed to kind of reapproach all of the monster films from the 30s. And they started off kind of by doing that with that Dracula Untold, that prequel. And then they also did this one. And then they did the new Invisible Man with Elizabeth Moss. But it didn't really go anywhere. So hopefully they'll either resurrect that company or that theory of, you know, I'm not saying they need to redo a bunch of other movies, but if they did decide to do that, that dark universe production would be cool. But again, I've pretty much heard it's canceled, so kind of sucks, Duke. Now, this one actually, the DVD I have of it is to the 50s version, but there's one that came out before the Vincent Price version, this House of Wax, called Mystery of the Wax Museum, and that came out in the 30s, so that's why I put it in here. But it comes on this DVD of House of Wax from the 50s. So there's 3 different versions. There's the 30s version, the 50s version with Vincent Price, and then the newest one from 2005 with Alicia Cuthbert and Chad Michael Murray. The original, to me, is more interesting because it's about a female reporter who kind of stumbles upon people she knows becoming the wax figures, and I think she was a more stronger character than the female in this movie. However, Vincent Price is in this, and I am a big fan of Vincent Price. I love any movie of his I've seen, so I really liked his version of House of Wax as well. And this also has Charles Brosnan in it, which is interesting. This version I really like because I saw this one first, and I like the turns that this one takes. This is more like the movie Tourist Trap from the 70s, which is a lot more similar to this movie than it is these two. But again, I would say check these out if you're a Vincent Price fan, if you just want to see the evolution of the House of Wax movies. This one's, I think, sometimes gets looked at as a little ridiculous because Paris Hilton's in it, but to me it was kind of fitting that she was in it. I mean, it really, there was a B-movie quality to it, but it was still, I still thought it was a great movie. And it has a great soundtrack in it. Now these are my Invisible Man movies. Now this is kind of hard to pinpoint if this was an Invisible Man adaptation or not, but it's the Hollow Man movies with Kevin Bacon. This is a 4-pack with Hollow Man 1 and 2, and then Fortress 2 and The Harvest, which I've never even heard of those. Hollow Man is basically similar to The Invisible Man with Claude Rains, where this guy who's basically experimenting on different, I can't even remember what they're really trying to do. I mean, they're working for the government kind of, and they're trying to come up with these new ways to, new advancements in technology, and Kevin Bacon ends up making himself invisible, and he kind of gets addicted to it, and it turns him into a very dark person, and he starts doing these really dark things. There is a sexual assault scene in it, and I don't love that it's in there. Luckily it's Kevin Bacon and I'm willing to forgive him for it in this movie. But it's a good movie if you like the idea of not being able to see your attacker, and it's just, it puts a lot of fear into you. And that, I haven't watched the second one yet. That one's got Christian Slater in it. I don't have a big desire to watch it. Again, I got this for like $3 on Amazon, so I was more or less just buying it to get Hollow Man. This is the newest version of The Invisible Man. This just came out this year with Elizabeth Moss. Now that Lee Whannell made this, the Canadian, or Australian, my bad, director, and he's been in like the Saw movies, and he's written the screenplays for the other Saw movies or something like that. But this was a really interesting psychological horror film, and it was more about this woman who had been in a relationship with the guy who developed the invisible. In this one, it's kind of a different setup, but she's running from him because he put all these ideas in her head that he would come back even if she ran away from him. So she's in mortal fear of him coming around, and then to top it all off, he ends up being invisible. So it's like, it becomes this real pain in the ass, and he starts destroying her life with it. And I really like this. The first time I watched this, I didn't love it, and then I watched it again with my sister, and I really liked it a lot more. It doesn't really take turns you'd expect if you have seen the other Invisible Man films. It kind of is its own thing, but again, I think Dark Universe, or Universal, was trying to kind of take these in a new direction with the remakes, or adaptations, I should say. Now, this is another Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi movie. They're in one together. So the guy who played Dracula and the guy who played the monster in Frankenstein in the originals are in a movie together. Universal did that a lot. They used a lot of the same actors for their horror films. But this is called The Black Cat. I don't really know how to explain this movie. It has something to do with some sort of fortune or something. This guy, it's like always some guy's like obsessed with money and power, and he's always like running these weird experiments on humans and animals and stuff. But this, I wanted to get this because I watched this 100 Scariest Movie Moments, and this is actually on there. They talked about this, and it was interesting to see Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi kind of, you know, interact with each other in this. Now, this last one I'm showing, I don't really know how to depict this, if it's a horror film, a thriller, but it's called Reefer Madness. Now, my dad told me about this. This is from 36, and this is a movie about, like, people kind of going nuts after smoking marijuana. It's like this guy gets accused of murder because he's hanging out with all these people smoking pot, and they kind of pin it on him because he's so messed up. And it was basically a society, you know, life lesson of, oh, don't do drugs. That's basically what this is. People start acting nuts after they smoke marijuana. But it was interesting to see, for sure. I mean, it's mass hysteria in this film beyond belief, but it was kind of silly too. That's why I don't know really how to like pinpoint where this goes, because it is something serious but also not terribly serious. So that's it for my 1930s horror films. Like I said, I'm going to do a second video of my films from the 30s that aren't horror films, but I wanted to divide it so it made more sense. But thank you for watching, and I hope you watch my next video that I'm about to upload. So